Now, in February 1980, the television comedy Yes Minister, written by Tony Jay and Jonathan Lynn, was first broadcast. Now, a quarter of a century on, the former Conservative Party leader William Hague takes a look back at the series to find out just how true to life it was.
25 years ago this week, one of the most fundamentally important elections of British politics took place.
David Lloyd Evans.
And here at Birmingham East, the returning officer is just declaring the
James
result.
George Hacker, 21,793. Arthur William Gaunt, 19,000.
So Jim Hacker's back with an increased majority, and after many years as a shadow minister, seems almost certain to get a post in the new government.
Of course, it didn't actually happen in real life, but it brought to our television screens the Machiavellian Sir Humphrey, the bumbling Jim Hacker, and exposed Whitehall for the farce that just sometimes is Yes Minister.
Minister, allow me to present Sir Humphrey Appleby, Permanent Under Secretary of State and head of the DAA.
Hello, Sir Humphrey.
Hello and welcome.
Thank you, Sir Humphrey.
I believe you know each other.
Yes, we did cross swords when the Minister gave me a grilling over the estimates in the Public Accounts Committee
I wouldn't say that.
Oh, you came up with all the questions I hoped nobody would ask.
Well, opposition's about asking awkward questions.
And government is about not answering them.
Well, you answered all mine anyway.
I'm glad you thought so, Minister.
It's 25 years since that first episode was broadcast in February 1980. How did politicians and civil servants regard the programme at the time? And how true to life was it? This week I'll be looking at reaction to Yes Minister. And then next time I'll be exploring specific events from the show that actually happened in real life, either beforehand or subsequently. So now let's explore Yes Minister, the view from Whitehall.
Well, I loved it from the start. I think everybody in Whitehall did. It was very difficult to get anybody to do anything in Whitehall, have any meetings or any evening engagements on the nights when it was being shown.
The extraordinary thing about Yes Minister, which I felt from the first broadcast, is how true it is to life. Of course it's a satire, but it's the best sort of satire in which the incidents actually have occurred, some of them quite literally in my lifetime.
They make a point in each of the episodes, but it's really trying to put into an entertainment and enjoyable context quite serious issues about how you deal with very difficult questions.
Former Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Roy Hattersley, and former Home Secretary, David Blunkett there. But the voice that told you that you couldn't get anyone in Whitehall to work on the evenings Yes Minister was on the box was the former Cabinet Secretary, Robin Butler. Little did the BBC know when it created Yes Minister that once a week it would paralyse the heart of the British state. That was true even at the height of the arms to Iraq scandal and the publication of Sir Richard Scott's report that almost brought the government of which I was a member to its knees. Lord Butler recalls that he and William Waldegrave, the cabinet minister at the heart of the affair, were dispatched to write the government's response the evening before the report's publication. This they did, sent it off to be typed, and then waited while the secretaries got to work.
To pass the time, we said, let's see what's on the television. And the BBC, no doubt not accidentally, had chosen to show an episode called The Arms Inquiry. Now, this episode was filmed even before the Iran-Iraq war, so it couldn't possibly have related to it. But nonetheless, it had wonderful truths for this situation. And one part of the episode was where Jim Hacker says to Sir Humphrey, well, we must set up an inquiry into the export of these arms. And Sir Humphrey said,
No, Minister, I beg you. A basic rule of government is never look into anything you don't have to. And never set up an inquiry unless you know in advance what its findings will be.
William and I looked at this. It was a dramatic moment in William's career where his political life hung by a thread, and we laughed until tears rolled down our cheeks.
There were 21 episodes of Yes Minister between 1980 and 1982. The elevation of Jim Hacker to the premiership in a Christmas special in 1984 then led to a further 16 episodes of Yes Prime Minister. Each programme played out the battles between the indecisive minister, Jim Hacker, and his scheming permanent secretary, Sir Humphrey Appleby. But how did these storylines develop? Sir Anthony Jay co-wrote the series.
Our storylines began with looking for areas that threw the civil service and the politicians into conflict, because it's conflict that creates the possibilities of comedy, or indeed drama and tragedy. The honours list, the civil service honours was one of them, and pay for the civil service is another. Most of our research was initially done by talking to people, particularly the sort of people who knew from the inside and were prepared to talk, and that was mostly the people who were advisors and things like that, who weren't terribly discreet.
One of the people who did talk was Bernard Donahue, the head of the Downing Street Policy Unit for Harold Wilson and James Callaghan in the 1970s. As someone at the heart of government, he knew all too well about the disputes between ministers and their officials. He became an invaluable source to Tony Jay and his co-writer Jonathan Lynn.
We lunched regularly. I would talk about my experiences in Number 10. I was aware of which of the experiences might be better adaptable to a plot than others, so I told them various stories, and as I talked they scribbled. Then, a little while afterwards, they sent me a script based on it, and I was always astonished at what they had added and how they had elaborated it, but not in a misleading way, and how they had introduced very valid comments on the political process.
Civil servants at the time sensed that the earlier programmes had been based on historic events from previous Labour governments. However, the series kept up to speed with Whitehall events. Lord Butler was principal private secretary to Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister at the time.
As the series wore on through Yes, Prime Minister, I think that these sources became more and more current and up to date. And I recognised the same episodes coming round from real life, because, of course, every year there is a problem about teachers' pay, or there's perennial problems about presentation.
It is true that the writers did find a more contemporary source, as I can reveal now. Ken Clarke was a cabinet minister at the time.
Anthony Jay came to see me once to discuss possible storylines and to get my reactions to it. I think it was part of his research as a scriptwriter. I can't remember whether I gave him any brilliant ideas. I was probably very, very cautious about the endless situations that I've been involved in, which certainly would have made the basis for a Yes Minister script.
But did Ken Clarke help in any other ways?
People sometimes say that I was the origin of a character and a scene of the smoking Minister of Health. And I have seen one or two that were remarkably similar to the exchanges I was having with my own officials. The authenticity was based on the language. Anthony Jay and his colleague had a feel for the way in which the more old-fashioned civil servants behaved. And as I'm now a bit of a veteran, so I first was a minister back in the Ice Age, in the old days, permanent secretaries and the old deputy secretaries certainly used to speak to their ministers in Mandarin and get extremely devious when you were trying to get them to do things that they didn't want to do, in a way that was remarkably close to the scripts of Yes Minister.
Is that really fair on the civil service? Was real life actually like that? Sir Michael Bishard is a former permanent secretary at the Education Department.
I think the series was quite true to life. And I think, like any good comedy, what it does is just slightly exaggerate the characteristics and sometimes the faults of the civil service. Not too far, but just slightly. And that's what makes it amusing. So, for example, I think the civil service does sometimes put process ahead of outcomes. The elegance of the process is what really matters. It ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. And Yes Minister gently poked fun at that.
What's the Foreign Office worried about then, Dick? Haven't you got the Foreign Secretary eating out of your hand?
Oh, yes, completely house tray.
So what's the problem?
The Prime Minister's the problem. He's starting to mistrust our advice when the Foreign Secretary gives it to him. He's even beginning to question Foreign Office policy.
Surely not.
We even see a danger of the Cabinet pursuing its own foreign policy.
But that's absurd. The country can't have two foreign policies.
Yes Minister suggested that civil servants had their own agendas and their own policies, which sometimes were not the same as those of the Minister. So what would those agendas be? Perhaps my old friend Norman Tebbit can shed some light on it.
Government departments basically exist because they represent or advance the interest of some interest group. The Department of Industry is obvious, the old Department of Agriculture advancing the interest of farmers, obviously. When I went to the Department of Employment, they really rather thought they represented the TUC. And you go to the Foreign Office and you find they represent foreigners.
The Foreign Office represent foreigners? Surely not. Liz Simons used to be the General Secretary of the 1st Division Association, the union of senior civil servants. Now, as a Labour peer, she is herself a Foreign Office minister.
When I first became a minister, I remember going through the policy about a particular country and saying that I thought that this policy should change and I thought there were various ways in which this could be addressed. And I ended up by saying that I myself proposed to visit this country very soon. There was stunned silence from the civil servants who were in the room with me at the time. And then one of them said, "But Minister, that's not Foreign Office policy." And you suddenly realise that there was a view amongst civil servants about what Foreign Office policy was, which went on irrespective of the government of the day.
Apparently this isn't just a problem in the Foreign Office. The same is true of domestic departments.
I found that when I went into the Home Office in particular, there was a Home Office tradition, there was a Home Office policy.
So what is that Home Office policy? Perhaps Norman can help again.
The Home Office represents criminals and the police, so it's got perpetual schizophrenia, and one lives in that world.
Thank you, Norman. Now back to David Blunkett.
And it did take a little time to ensure that everyone knew that the policy of the department, and therefore the policy of the government, was the policy of the minister. But it's inevitable, really. I mean, permanent secretaries are permanent. There has to be continuity. They serve governments of all persuasions. We don't have the American system. So there is a helpful continuance and continuity, but it also means, of course, that things are carried from one Secretary of State to another, from one administration to another.
Sir Michael Bishard was David Blunkett's first permanent secretary at the Education Department when Labour entered government in 1997.
The way in which the programme suggests that there are sometimes departmental agendas, and that sometimes, just sometimes, permanent secretaries have their own agendas, that is very observant, and actually, more seriously, is something which concerned me. There have been examples over the last 20 or 30 years when particular departments have certainly had their own agenda and have sought to promote that in the face of quite strong opposition from ministers. I think more broadly than that, there's a question about whether sometimes the civil service or some civil servants think that they have access to a set of values which are somehow superior to the values which politicians have. And I think that comes through gently, but it comes through in Yes Minister.
So the show may have captured the mood of government well. But are there events that politicians look at and think, that is so right, it's happened to me? Hello? Yes? Sorry, do you mind? I'm expecting quite an important call. Sorry about that. The first episode of Yes Minister captured only too well the anxiety that every politician goes through after there has been an election or when they know there is going to be a reshuffle. You are hooked by the telephone, waiting for that call from number 10. And that call, and only that call, is the most important thing in your life.
Hello, yes, speaking. Oh, it's you, Michael. No, I haven't had a call. Have you had a call? Bill's had a call. What's he got? Europe?
Waiting by the telephone for the call that may not come is one of those familiar things that afflicts the life of every politician. When Margaret got in 1979, I wasn't sitting by the telephone literally, although I was often told people are, But certainly there was no call the first day, and some of my mates' names were appearing in the newspapers. And then the second day there was no call, and I was one of the last appointed, and I would be less than human if I did not admit that, having been on the front bench in opposition, I was getting seriously concerned that this may be a defining moment in my career.